My next guest is the Executive Director of Seeking Educational Excellence, the host of the Charles Love Show on AM 560 The Answer, and the co-host of the Cut the Bull podcast, and his radio program airs in Chicago. Charles Love, thanks for coming back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so, Chicago, New York, Portland, Minneapolis, all the major cities controlled by Democrats are not working. They're not functioning right now. And you see people in these Democrat cities that almost feel powerless, but they've almost never considered or never had the opportunity in their lives to vote for anything else.
Oh, definitely not in Chicago. I mean, they've been running unopposed forever. There are no Republicans in most of the positions. And I think if you want to be honest, when you talk to normal people, they are so bothered by what's going on. What they do know, they need to be more informed, but what they do know, they don't even put any labels on it. They don't think about politically like us who are in the media and talk about this stuff all the time. They don't think about, look at what the Democrats and the Republicans did or they're doing. What they say is gas is too high, you can't afford to rent any place, and you get shot when you go to the park. Fix it. They know who's in power as in individuals, so they never say, I don't like Democrats, but they'll say, I don't like Alvin Bragg, or I don't like de Blasio, or now Eric Adams. So they haven't really connected the two, but they're starting to see that there's a problem, and they speak out about that a lot.
When you think of what a city government should do, it should deal with crime, it should provide a good education, parks and rec, and maybe sanitation, right? And inspect the restaurants to make sure we're not going to get food poisoning.
And I'm even okay without that.
As you say, and some libertarians might even argue let the market decide that. But the education, the government-run education system, I look at someone like Eric Adams. There was such high hopes for him, right? He was a former police officer, a captain. He had one job, bring down the crime rate. Didn't even do that. And that now he is facing very angry voters. But the education, I think they go hand in hand. If the city can't provide a good education, it's probably going to have a high crime rate. If it has if it can't control the high crime rate, it's going to have a city full of miserable people.
Oh, it's all tied together because who's going to run it? You need tax money, whether you like the government or not. The government functions off the taxes. They don't create anything. So who's going to open a business if they can't protect their business or their merchandise? So now without the tax base in the business, they lose that. As far as the schools, obviously there's some people who wanted to ban the Department of Education, and they don't think the government is the best place to do it. But while that's the system, they should be doing it right. But they are failing at that miserably. They were failing before COVID and George Floyd, and now on top of that, they're layering a gravy of, weird sex and racist ideology on top of the poor performance they were already doing. So that's a problem. And then the crime thing. Now to Eric, I give him a little bit of credit in the sense that he's saying the right things around the crime. Like, this is bad. We should do something, right? But as long as, we focus on police, but as long as we do nothing about the people who are violent, going to jail and just revolving door, letting them out, it doesn't matter if the police arrest them or not. Right? Because they're going to get back on the street. So until he addresses that, it's not going to have an effect. And he disagrees with that, according to his words. But nothing has been effectively done toward that. It's all has been, I'm going to support the police, which is fine. I'm going to do that stuff. But that means nothing if the DA's letting them out of jail.
I don't expect the majority of urban dwelling voters to all of a sudden become, America, MAGA, hat-wearing, conservatives. I don't. But you would think that there would be some Democrats that go, you know what? We can still be progressives, right? We can still march in the gay pride parade. We can still ban plastic bags or something. We could, we can still do all that stuff and still deliver a good education system and a low crime rate and a thriving business community. I would have to imagine somewhere out there there's a Democrat, even if disingenuously, there'd be some Democrat that would take that position.
But that's the weird piece. So the problem, we get into this cycle where the Democrats are afraid to run as a Democrat and just say, there are a few, in New York, we have Maud Maron, there are a few, but most of them are afraid to run as a Democrat, say, I'm a Democrat, I have a lot of liberal views, but I don't think violent criminals should be on the street, and I don't think 4-year-olds should be wearing a mask. What's so complicated? And I don't think you should tell children about their gender and that kind of thing. They exist, they don't tend to run for office. On the Republican side, there's a void because the Republicans feel we can't win in these big cities, so they don't run anything, and they have been quiet for a while. So Trump comes along and fires people up, but it didn't trickle down to the local level, right? So you get a few, but you don't have people running on a local level from the GOP side to give them the offer. So if I'm a regular guy who's nonpartisan, I don't care about DRR. I just want to get a guy who's going to get the job done. They look on the left, the people who are sensible are afraid to run. They look on the right, there's a ghost. So what do you do? There's nobody there for them to vote for, so we get Eric Adams.
You know what's funny is that, like, I know Rudy Giuliani is like public enemy number one to a lot of people, but he was a pretty liberal Republican. Man, he not only marched in the gay pride parade, they pretty much put him in drag at one point. You know, he came in socially, he was a super liberal guy, or at least a super tolerant guy. What Giuliani did was he cracked down on crime. It increased the business environment. Times Square went from this kind of war zone to a tourist destination. Jobs were created. You know, he kind of found that balance in New York City as a Republican. He wasn't a hard-charging conservative. Even when he ran for president, he wasn't a hard-charging conservative. This seems to be escaping it. If there was one city you could look at, you might go, okay, well, they're trying it. They're not even trying it in any of these cities.
Not at all. I can't think of one. I mean, I do radio and I travel often to Chicago. I live in New York City. I got friends in other cities. We're on Cut the Bull. We're about to do is we're starting with David Marcus this week. We're going to do a series of people who live and grow up and focus on certain towns and say, what has changed since George Floyd and COVID? What are you living in now? What was it like? What do you like about it? So they're going to give me the skinny on Seattle and Portland and Houston and New York. But yeah, from the people I talk to, I don't hear anyone saying this is the city that's knocking it out of the park, especially a city that's making the priority, you know, gender identity, defunding the police and all that kind of stuff. So if that's what they're doing now, forget about the person who's pushed that. Where are the people coming up, Democrat or Republican, running to move away from that? You don't have enough of it.
Well, you know, you might even look at a city like Miami, right? I mean, you know, Florida's a pretty red state. Miami, I'd say, is pretty blue. But I never, when I hear the list of cities that are having these massive problems, I rarely hear Miami listed in that.
Yeah, that may be true. I mean, I think that they have an interesting mix of people in Miami, right? They have they vote mostly Democrat, but they have a strong, Catholic. You know, they got Cubans. They got a strong group of people with traditional values, regardless of what their political parties are. But I think that exists in other places too. So I don't know why it doesn't take hold in other places as well.
Do you think the label conservative or the label Republican? Because a lot of working class people that live in the major cities, they have pretty conservative values when you get right down to it.
Well, this is going to be interesting. I think the label does hurt, but that's the fault of both your enemy being the Democrat labeling you that way and you not being able to fight back and say, this is what I truly believe. And in some places, I get flack for this. It has nothing to do with my views. I'm just looking at it as a political game. I think that they're kind of the way they play the repeal of Roe v. Wade, instead of being pragmatic about it, it's kind of like they threw up the confetti and say, yeah, knowing right or wrong that the Democrats were going to use that and say, okay, whatever you think, I know we're doing a bad job, but these people, hate women, so vote for us anyway. So you're going to get some people who are going to buy into that. I think they should have been a little more, long forward thinking about the way they outside of the next day, just saying, okay, everything's banned and you can't even surf it on the internet kind of deal. But, we'll see what happens.
I only disagree on one little point. Like, you look at a state like New York, when it goes back to the states, is it really in danger in New Jersey? Is it really in danger in New York State? I mean, most politicians can say, "What do you want from us? That's not what we deal with. We're not dealing with that. That's going to be the state." I'm talking. Right. This is where we are in the city.
Right. No, I agree with that. What I mean by that is in a city like, a state like, say, Missouri. So what will happen is some of these states, not all of them, they're going to push for ban all the way to zero. And they're going to push it through because it's back to the states and they'll win. But then the people are going to be rabid about it and they're going to push and they're going to vote them out. Instead of getting someone like you say, Giuliani, who's more center right in the middle, they're going to go, I always go to the extreme. And now they're going to replace your governor with some left wing governor. And now you're going to be New York. And then you're going to be kicking yourselves. Well, we had the reins. We should have managed it better. That's all I'm saying.
All right, I got to leave it there. So, yeah, I guess you're going to, if that's your single issue that you're voting on, you're going to live with everything else.